My name is Sylwia Serafinowicz. I'm a curator at Apolitical, based in London, and it is my really great pleasure to be in conversation today with Keith and Drillminister. And I would like to say hello to both. Thank you for waiting. And for those who are joining us just now, I would just say a couple of words of introduction, introduce Keith and Drillminister. Keith is a visual artist and an associate professor in fine art at Middlesex University, London. He was a founding member of the BLK art group in the early 1980s. His work over the last 30 years has ranged from painting, photography, and installation to use of digital media, video, and computer-based interactivity. He has exhibited work internationally and taken part in site-specific projects. His work features in a number of important public collections, including the Tate, Arts Council of England, Wolverhampton Art Gallery, Sheffield Art Gallery, the International Slavery Museum, and MIMA. Drillminister is currently launching his bid for 2021 London mayoral elections. And as an internationally recognized musician, he uses drill as a tool to engage with a new generation of voters on political issues, such as the struggles of working people, violence, and rising levels of air pollution in the city. Drill has garnered widespread media attention, having been accused by the UK government of glamorizing weapons and gang life. Against the persistent suppression of the Drillminister has worked to eradicate the stereotype of UK drill musicians as violent criminals. Hello to both again. It's good to see you, Drilly. So I just would start from saying that in the background of this conversation, I would play a video of, sorry, just a second. A video of Democracy's intervention, Enjoy the Collapse, Silence from this summer in London. And it did strike me when I rewatched this video. This intervention took place on the 13th of June when Black Lives Matter protests clashed in the city center with the right-wing, far right-wing protests. And it was a very charged day. And it was also a day before and an anniversary of Grenfell Tower fire. As I was watching this video, I realized that for someone who has not been there, like those streets, the demonstrations can look very, the streets mostly can look very peaceful, and that it's very difficult to explain the emotional investment and everything that led to the protest and its aftermath. And that's why I really wanted to be in conversation with Keith and Drilly, who are both London-based and who were either taking direct part in the protests or observing them, to speak about it. And I would start from my question to Keith. Keith is currently writing about making art in the age of anxiety, and also did a brilliant piece in 2007 titled The Perfect City. And in that video, he says that, and I quote, contamination and pandemic seem to underline every cityscape, and chaos is its inbuilt inclination. So that leads me to a question. I'm really curious what, Keith, were your thoughts about the protests on one hand, and then attempts at bringing social order back during this summer, during the pandemic?
Interesting. About these protests, obviously they were spontaneous, absolute outpourings of kind of rage in the aftermath of kind of seeing the kind of graphic murder of George Floyd. And I think it was fascinating how across the world, people came out to respond to that. Obviously, in that particular moment, when we were all completely entrenched in this idea of the kind of danger of outside spaces, that there was pandemic, that was all these kind of things for young people to then say, well, racism is a greater pandemic, and so we need to be out there and protest that. I think that was a really, really interesting moment. Now, obviously, that work was made a long time ago. It was made in, I think it was 2012. So it was a response to a different type of London landscape. But I think that a whole range of things that were raised in that particular work are kind of interesting and pertinent to the moment. Obviously, in terms of looking at the images which are on screen now, the thing which happened with the particular march that you were talking about was that the far right also came out in order to, or they said to defend the monuments, because there had been this kind of thing that there were going to be attacks on some of these monuments of historic figures, historic British figures. And so the far right came out to defend the monuments, to defend this kind of idea that there was going to be an assault on, you know, some type of version of British history. And so it's a really interesting element in terms of that. We're still thinking about those moments. We're still thinking about how that language acts. And I'm really pleased, I have to say, like personally, I'm really pleased to kind of share this space with Adam Drilly, because I was really, really intrigued by his take on the kind of language, the language of confrontation, you know, in terms of kind of politics and parliament, and the way that that was then built into a kind of drill music, which was fascinating. And you know, every time I watch that, new things are emerging. So I'm really fascinated now by the way that particular kinds of language systems are overlapping within art practice, and especially when I saw, you know, that particular piece from Drilly. But anyway, I don't know if that answers your question. Hope it's just like a range of reflections.
Really, would you like to respond?
Well, which bit? What the?
Yeah, I didn't even have a question in there. I just was
saying
there wasn't
that actually a question. There was
that is respect to that piece of music. Oh. Because when I heard that and when I saw how that was coming out and how that came out in response to the particular language used by politicians, and then backing it up against the kind of language of drill, and the way those, you know, that language then sounds in relationship to that you know, that was really
the culture of drill is stating what is your gripes, what is upsetting you, what is against you, and trying to navigate around that. And I think that's why it's considered what when people look at it as negative, because every single day, obviously this word's overused these days, but gaslighting, which is a form of telling people propaganda, is in every form of media these days. We're sold something every day, even when we're being told of activism or something righteous. It comes with a RRP at the end. Comes with a regular retailer's price. So that, to me, is the fall of modern day democracy, in the fact that everything is being sold to us. So what is really true? So when a situation like, not just, obviously you described it, the situation and the tensions were building. When the George Floyd situation came to London, obviously people were 100% outraged. So people were outraged. That was the first initial thing. But I think what it really did, that situation, I think it was so graphic for the Black diaspora across the world, that it kind of it undid wounds that weren't healed from before. So there were people in England whose family members had been killed by the police, but nothing of this magnitude and nothing of this attention span ever landed on their doorstep for them to have a voice. There was a young boy, he was a friend of mine, not my personal friend, but a friend of mine. He was killed earlier in the year in East London, strangled to death in a shop by a policeman on camera. The whole country saw it. There was no George Floyd for that. We all saw it. He was murdered right there on the camera. But because it's Britain and we got a stiff upper lip and we're not meant to be seen in that light, we have the crown, we have a monarchy, we're not meant to be seen as savage, as like America, which I always describe it as the land of the merchants, the land where there is no higher power, there is no lord above the monarchy. There's just a few men writing on a piece of paper calling it a constitution. So it's the land of merchants. It's the land to be sold. It's a land where marketing is king. And that is transcending as a culture across the world now. So I guess people are fighting against that and fighting against this culture of selling us dreams, selling us a future, selling us like purpose through false ideologies. And I guess that came to a big point in London where people just had enough. They came from all walks of life, black, fat, short, tall, and they were marching as one. The day that he's talking about with the EDL, that day was, it involved the EDL, obviously. The EDL are, if you don't know, they're a far-right group in England that their whole purpose is to get rid of immigration and to get rid of people they don't believe add to the economy of Britain, which is basically anybody that's not white. So they came with the intention to defend monuments. There's a lot of confusion there because the footage of monuments that were actually torn down, there wasn't a black person inside when the monuments were actually brought down on visually. There was black people there, but the people that dragged down the statue were actually white in Bristol. It weren't actually black people that dragged down the statue. They were jumping on top of it. They were there. They weren't the actual culprits. That was then brandished upon the whole black caucus that we are now bringing down statues left, right, and center when we weren't. Our cause was actual change, reform in actual policies, like marching for something. We weren't marching for statues. Yeah. This was a false narrative that was thrown on to the movement to stem it, to say, look, they're making trouble. Because the first thing of any change is to throw trouble and throw like a fire on the flame to make it bigger. So before we can try solve things. So they threw this, we're destroying statues and people are being like not behaving, when that wasn't the truth. There were parents with their children marching there. There was nothing to do. It was nothing to do with any of that. Then when I turned up on the day of the EDL, I accidentally went to the wrong tube station and ended up on the EDL side. I actually walked through them to get to the Black Lives Matter march. When I walked through, it was funny because obviously being who I am, they knew who I was. So they were shouting me out, can you believe fucking Drillminister's here, and cracking jokes. They didn't touch me, but they could have easily. I walked through. The police let me go to the other side. And then when I went to the Black Lives Matter side, there was approximately at the Trafalgar Square, there was around, when I got there, about 90 people. There were 90 people there. I thought, wow, I thought there was so much more than this, but there was only 90 people. What I had just walked through was 3,000 people. There were 3,000 EDL, and I walked to Trafalgar Square and saw more or less 90 black people. So I realized, if this 3,000 people descend upon these 90 people, everybody here is dead. There's no way that even with the lessest injuries or somebody kicking someone in the head, blood leaking to your brain, any accident can happen in those environments. So when they started throwing fireworks at people and then they started fighting the police, I realized what was happening. People weren't at that moment fighting to prove a point. They were fighting not only for their right to protest, they were fighting for their right in Britain. At that exact moment, every single person sent a text message. More people started descending upon Trafalgar Square. Before I knew it, within an hour, there was maybe close to 500 people. But 500 versus 3,000 still isn't enough. So the police had to direct people in another direction. It didn't work. The EDL broke past the police. They started attacking us. They threw bottles. They tried to injure women. There were children that they were throwing fireworks at. It was all happening at one quick moment, and everybody realized how much in danger they were, because when a mob like that descends on you, it's not really like an equal fight of a one-on-one where you're in the school playground. It's literally like 400 men running at you, throwing things, shouting, screaming. And they're literally, the only reason they have a distaste for you is because the color of your skin is different to theirs. They don't have anything personally against you. They don't know you. They don't know your mother. They don't know how you grew up. They just don't like you're not the same as them. And they see a Britain that they grew up in changing. They see a Britain that they thought they always identified with being taken away when it's not. There are powers that be that are pitting us against each other. These aren't the rich, affluent people of Britain that I was fighting against on that day. This was the poor, underprivileged, forgotten about Britain that are just as poor as me, just as lost for opportunity as me. And they've been confused by throwing immigration and throwing immigrants and excuses at them to the point where they're so confused and so angry, they're taking it out on the man that's doing no better than them. And I think that day, the reality of all the violence, the reality of all, what did it all come to? What did anybody gain? I think that's why Britain's just quickly tried to sweep that one under the carpet, because it was a very shameful day for the country. They ended up going up there, getting drunk. There was no actual protest from them. They actually ended up pissing on them on the monuments. They urinated on the actual British monuments that they went to protect. On top of that, they ended up calling people names, fighting against the police. They ended up assaulting police officers that they actually went there to apparently protect. So it was a travesty, and it was an embarrassing moment for the media of Britain, because before this incident, the media of Britain was painting them as the heroes and the Black Lives Matter people as the villains. So when they were saying, they were painting it in a narrative of men traveling from all over Britain to protect monuments. And the Prime Minister himself made a statement which almost more or less gave free rein for these men to protect the monuments. He said, we shouldn't be ashamed of our monuments. We need to protect them with all will. So he gave backing to these men to attack and maim whoever they needed to do in the name of king and queen and country. And that was noted on the day by everybody that was there, because you knew the Prime Minister is more or less giving free rein for these men to throw bottles at you right now when you've done nothing. You just come to protest for your cause, for something completely different, to change rights, to make some sort of difference. And then we got wrapped into a whole political espionage of something that had nothing to do with us. And I think that's what happens to all movements. I might be over talking, but I believe all movements, they're pure in intention, and then people try to confuse the people about what the intention of the movement purely was at the beginning. By doing this, you create a confusion, you create a distaste for that movement, and people associate it to something before they even understand what it is. And I think that's what's happened in especially Britain with the Black Lives Matter movement. We had a poll this week saying Black Lives Matter has created 58% increase of social racial tensions. That doesn't make sense to me. If it's 58% racial tensions, doesn't that mean that 58% of people in Britain just realized there was a problem? Because if 58% of those people weren't making any noise before, but there were people that were living like that really felt affected by this, traumatized by how the British society and the systematic racism is making them not excel in their field, in their jobs, or not making them be able to get the right credit score because of the area they're from, or all of the systematic things that are already in place. If this 58% of people didn't know any of this existed, how can it be attention? It doesn't make sense to me.
So to follow up on what you just said, because you started from describing the situation of your friend being killed by the police officer, and no reporting on that you would see by the media. So I was wondering if, in your opinion, things have changed since the protest, like in the aftermath. Do you see more media interest in this kind of cases, in police brutalities, or are things like more or less the same?
More or less, things are exactly the same. Nothing has changed. After the Black Lives Matter protest, there's a very famous rapper from this country named Wretch 32. His dad was on the evening news for being, his dad is 75 plus. His dad was assaulted and thrown down the stairs by the police on camera, and they tasered him. A 75-year-old man. They intruded into his house, said there was a disturbance. He was coming out of the bathroom, shocked to see two men in his house, didn't realize they're police. They grabbed him and then threw him down the stairs, but it was on camera. So this was 2 weeks after the protest. And a famous rapper, it's almost like having P. Diddy's father and you throw him down the stairs for the whole culture, the whole race to see that this is how you even treat our elders. It doesn't matter the age, it doesn't matter. So that you can say that the young people are the problem, or they're the ones causing the tension, they're the ones protesting. What the hell did the 75-year-old man do? Was there even a restraint needed for a 75-year-old man? If he was white, would you have grabbed the 75-year-old man and threw him down the stairs? So this is what everybody had to ask themselves, watching that, being traumatized by seeing that, because we heard him screaming, the man screaming for his life on television. That's like, how do you even apologize for that? You can't apologize for that. So we saw that and we took that in, just like all the other pain that we see and we take in, and we just bottle it away, like Britain tries to make you do, like it never happened. Like I said, Britain is the best at sweeping things under the carpet. We have a monarchy. There's a certain upper lip. We can't be seen to do certain things. So even when something is really bad, it will be bad maybe in France, it will be bad in Spain, but in Britain, you will never hear about it. It will only be on our shores. If something leaves our shores, we must have really fucked up.
And Keith, how do you feel about that? I mean, like, how do you specifically feel about the debate after around policing after Black Lives Matter protests? Like, do you think anything has changed? And I also am tempted to ask you, even in a broader perspective, because you've been very vocal about police brutality at least since 1980s. So I'm very curious what your opinion is on that.
I was intrigued by this point around video, around the fact that these things are happening, and we actually have video footage of it. I mean, the kind of events some really was speaking about the kind of, and it's been called the kind of Battle of Trafalgar. There is actually a really interesting video of that made by Bahamian folk actually in the square at the time, who can see the whole thing unfolding, etc., etc. So it's really important now that we have these documents, in order, because things will be pushed under the carpet. Things do happen, and then there is no response. However, if these videos exist, then we always know that we can, at some point, there can at some point be the activism which is built around that. And so I think that is really important in terms of the kind of tools which we now all have. We have our mobile phones, we have our whatever. So in a sense, that becomes really important. The scary thing is, in terms of your point, really, is what is happening in France now, it seems. Because in France now, I don't know if you heard about it, there's this thing where they're kind of bringing in a new law, which is, it is now illegal to videotape the police and to spread that video. I don't know if you've heard that. I don't know if is that just me?
Yes.
Yes. And so there's huge protests about that. But if you imagine that, all of these kind of key events which have shaped the narrative around race over the last few years, all revolved around videotapes, all involved around this visibility given to things. If that has gone, then that's a major loss to the way that we build consciousness around these things. So just, that's what I wanted to say.
Yes, go on, Rudy.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah, I just want to say that unfortunately it's a broader trend, because Democracia was prosecuted for the photographs of the police officers because Spain passed a similar law in 2014. So it has already been legalized in some part of the world, and it is a trend. I wanted to go back quickly to your experience of protest, really, and ask you about security, like your own security, and because I saw that there was a lot advice like circulating on social media about how to behave and how to prepare for the protests, and I think that that is something that links the experience in London and in Warsaw. So if you could share your thoughts about that.
That's definitely an important thing. When going to a protest, you have to at least map out your entrance and your exit. Some protests have marches. You have to know where your entrance is on that particular area, street, road, and you have to know where your exit is before you make the journey towards the protest. You also have to make sure you know how many people you're arriving with and how many people you're leaving with. The thing of that is because in previous protests, people have split off into smaller groups from the larger group, and those smaller groups have been preyed upon when the protest is over by the opposition side or whoever it is that feels as though you shouldn't be protesting. So on the day of the Battle of Trafalgar, as he calls it, that on that day, there were people injured on both sides because of that very same thing. So the police directed a large crowd of people towards Waterloo from Trafalgar. When we went towards Waterloo, there were maybe about 400 people traveling across the bridge, walking, all of us. And then when we got towards the station, say 20 or so EDL members were at the Waterloo station, and they were attacking a little boy with his sister. So they were attacking this little boy with his sister. Everybody has seen it, but imagine it was like a pantomime. It's like one of those pantomimes when they say, "Oh, he's behind you, he's behind you." So they were beating on this person and didn't realize there was a mob of 400 people behind them. So it was just like the beating of a lifetime. And then I saw that one with my own eyes. And then that's when I realized, wow, it's even dangerous for both sides. Like you need to be with your people, arrive with your people and leave with your people at any protest, because if things get sticky, or you need to make sure that you've got water. You need to have a lot of hydration, because you don't know the hours, or if the police sandwich you, they have these techniques. I don't know what the real wording of it is, but they sandwich you. So
kettling.
Kettling or whatever it's called, they do that a lot. So they'll block you on a road for like maybe up to an hour, 2 hours, until they've cleared another road, or until whatever they believe is safe for you to transcend to another area. So kettling causes a lot of tension as well. It causes a lot of violence because people get annoyed. No one likes to be kept anywhere or feel like they're a prisoner. So kettling is another technique you have to watch out for. And more or less just try not to get too wrapped up in emotion. Try to protest with just like an open heart and know what you're going there for. Don't try to get too wrapped up in emotion, because of course it's a place where you're meant to show that you're disgusted about something. It's where you're meant to voice your opinion. But when you get caught up in emotion, you end up doing something or acting, or something will take you over an emotion. Oh, you're shouting back at the police, you get yourself arrested for no reason. So don't get caught up in emotion is a thing I'd say, because they're looking for anything to try to stop the protest. So you have to do your utmost to try to keep the protest as peaceful as possible and as disturbing as possible. You have to disturb them, if anything. You have to disturb social order as much as you can, but keep it as legal as you can.
Keith, would you like to respond to?
Yeah. Just the only thing I wanted to add to it, because I'm old. I'm an old man now, and so I go back to my earliest protests were the ones in the late 1970s, the kind of rock against racism thing like that, when we were marching against the National Front and all those things. And so all of these things some actually says, I mean, what's staying with your people, all that kind of stuff. Everything is correct, and if those have been the rules going back to the late 1970s and 1980s. The thing which has really evolved, and the thing which we really have to watch, are the tactics of the police, because the police have been studying the way that crowds move for decades and decades and decades, and bringing in all kinds of new tactics. So that whole thing around kettling, that whole thing around splitting certain people up, you know, snap squads, all that kind of stuff. We've seen all of those things played out over the years, and you have to be aware of the way the police are training themselves to respond to people on the street. And sometimes they will actually want to antagonize and spark the violence, because then that gives them the context and the pretext to bring in more and more powers and more weapons. And we've seen that. We saw that in the 1980s with the miners' disputes and all the kind of, you know, political disputes of the Thatcher era. You know, those were actually provoked specifically in order to create an argument to tool the police up more and more and more. So it's very, very interesting. You know, so now that we've arrived at this particular point that we can see the police playing out particular tactics, we know where those come from. We know the history of those things. That's awesome.
I have a question from the audience that is also linked with a question I wanted to ask to Drew. Really, we spoke earlier today about the fact that because you're a mayor of, you want to become a mayor of London. He's running from mayor. You're quite often asked about knife crime in London and policing, and the question refers to that. It starts from Boom Bam, Mr. Drillminister in Poland. It is proposed to reduce the financing of the police, while in London the police are underfunded. That's why the poorer districts of the city are insufficiently patrolled. Would you, as the mayor of London, increase the police budget, and which areas in this case require the most urgent funding? I'm reading as, you know, as it is. And another question, when will your EP come out?
Okay, the first thing,
yeah,
I would not increase the police budget of London. The reason being is because I've seen the real budget that the mayor gets, which is 16 billion a year. So out of 16 billion, how much does the police actually need? The police currently receive around 6.5 billion a year. That could run a small country. I don't understand what have they got RoboCop there? There's no reason for the police to have 6.5 billion, and crime is still raising. People are still dying. There's still people, young ladies being groomed and raped. All sorts of things are happening in London. It's still happening. So what we need is to look at how we are policing. We need to look at why are we bringing in officers that are from Bristol to work in London for the day when they don't know the local community. And they're all going to do is just look at a bunch of boys in tracksuits going to football and assume that they're selling drugs. And you're going to make those boys grow up with a distaste for the police, which then goes on into generations and generations. It's the same thing. So we need to look at community policing. We need to look at other forms of deterrence. When there's young people and they're going astray, we need to look at community leaders that can lead them, people that can aspire, or some sort of scheme where we bring people back to the community who have become successes in their own right, and they mentor a bunch of boys or a bunch of girls into something. Or we encourage these big companies in London like Google and Amazon that are feeding and eating off of Britain tax-free, that don't actually pay any tax in Britain. Why don't these companies actually pay for young girls in London in these underprivileged areas to do data mining and do other things, invest in other areas, invest in the children, invest in the people, don't invest in the police? What are they going to do? Buy more handcuffs? What are you going to actually do? What is the cause of that? Are we going to lock up more people? Is that going to solve things? So we've got more mentally disturbed people in a jail cell. They're going to come out at some time. So what have we got to solve? Have we got a way of solving when they come out in 7 years and they're angry at the system and they want to fuck us up even more? So it doesn't make sense. You're just locking away your problem and hiding from it instead of dealing with the problem on the ground. You got a young disturbed kid at 14, 15, messing around, robbing, doing certain stuff, behaving bad. Deal with the situation then. Don't wait for him to become a professional criminal at 21 and then say, oh, we lost him. This is what is wrong with the system. The system just wants to throw money at the problem. They don't want to throw money at the solution. More police is not the solution. It's never been the solution. It's not even a deterrent, really, because when it really, really boils down, if someone's really going to do crime, they already know what they're doing. They already know what they're willing to risk. So the police is not a deterrent for that. What you need is to give people actual hope, actual inspiration of a future. When you already know that university fees are way beyond your means and your family's living on universal credit, you can't afford to go to that university. So that future is not for you. But maybe working in the local grocery store for the rest of your life till you're 50 and drop dead, that is your future. And that's what a lot of people see. And they don't want that for themselves because they've seen their parents work endless jobs, 2-3 jobs a week, and the mortgage still isn't paid. They're still living in the red. So no one wants that life for themselves. So this quick, easy money of this new life that we live in and this internet world that we're in today, it gravitates to the youth. It speaks to them. They're more interested in Kim Kardashian than they are their own parents. This is the reality. This is what's been sold to them. So how can you show people iPads, show people Macs, all the latest technology, all of this stuff, shove it in their face on Instagram adverts every single day, making them feel like crap, and then tell them they're not allowed to have it? It's not going to happen. The world doesn't work like that.
I really appreciate that whenever you ask this question, you make it about the community. So you're making it about the long-term solutions and long-term effort instead of, you're basically diverting from this, single-minded subject of police funding. So there's a real value in there. And we'll need to finish this conversation soon, but I was curious if Keith has any final thoughts.
No, well, I'm not running for a mayor, and so I don't need to have the kind of in depth and detailed financial picture. I mean, my position is every public institution needs to be constantly undergoing reform, looking at the way it does things, looking at the way that it spends public money, and making it better. This constant process. I think it's really important that the police remain a public service, and so they are answerable to government, to the people, to the voters. So the whole thing of a privatization of the police, which is what defunding the police could actually mean. You just get private police forces. They need to remain in the public sector, but be reformed. And those very specific things which policing should be doing, those are the things which they need to be developing.
That bit that he said about the defunding, I've heard it said in America, and I didn't really understand the defunding until someone explained it to me. And then I kind of understood the defunding. It doesn't mean defunding the police as in taking away the police's entire income and not having a police. It means redirecting funds that are given to the police that they don't really actually need.
That's
so
reform,
if we've got a lot of men that act out because of mental health issues, why the hell are we sending the police? How the hell is the police going to help somebody that's mentally disturbed?
Of course,
we need to be giving them carers, people that actually are in that sector, mental health physicians, people that can come and cater to that person with like a protective aid in that situation, something like that. We need to look at why are we having lots of runaway kids and you got police locking them up and putting them in the cell for the night. They need to be looking at social care workers that are on the ground 24 hours that drive around looking for runaway kids and things like that. We're putting money in the wrong areas. So it doesn't make any sense. You got a policeman turning up to be a mental health person. You got a police turning up to be a social worker. You got a police turning. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Because all those public services need to be interlocked completely. And so that's
ultimately, government are so tight, they would rather give one man 5 guys jobs. When really the police are just meant to be coming out if there's a social disturbance or something.
That's one of the roles. That's one of the roles of a particular type of policing.
They're not meant to be coming out for just any Tom, Dick, and Harry problem, which is what as the public sector money they're being used for, which is why they cost so much, because they're being used for everything. Someone gets a cat stuck up in a tree, they're calling the police. Why are you calling the police for? Like this is what actually ends up happening. They're being overused. So
what's the community support thing? The community support policing. You see these community support.
Those guys have no legal power. What they can do is they can call the police if they see a disturbance. They can't actually withhold anybody. They don't have any. They've got power of I think they can hold someone actually if they've
yeah, but they're the cat stuck up the tree and the person and just the
yeah,
kind of like everyday
of,
thing, and they come from that community, so they look like the people in that community. So in a sense, it's about having those different types of policing with different roles, and also policing which is interlocked with things like the social services, like this, you know, and so it's all interlocked. I mean, we have the technology to do all these things. We just need to kind of, you know, organize that on the ground. And so when you're mayor, I'm looking for this, you know, really. Trust me, I'm looking for it.
That's the whole point of it, just to get people into the mind frame of thinking they need to redirect the funds of the city to the people, to the actual people, if in any capacity, whether it be for the elderly, we start building allotments and doing something for community regrowth and making vegetation that we give to the primary schools, that the old people in their spare time are making vegetables and cooking fruit and making fruit and then giving it to the local schools. If we do something organic and use the community to help the community, it'll be better. But if we look at all of these corporatization companies to come in and do quick initiatives and keep throwing away the governmental money on outsourcing, this is going nowhere. We're going nowhere anywhere soon. And this is what I've seen since I got into politics. I'm from the roads. I'm not from this thing, but I understand road politics. Road politics is there's always a guy at the top. I've tried to figure out quickly in this politics thing, who is the guy pulling the strings. Up till now, I still don't know who it is. I still don't know who, because there's a million guys pulling strings. There's this guy pulling strings for the police. There's this guy pulling strings for transport. Everybody's getting paid, but the people. This is what is fucked about Britain. This is what fucked about democracy. Democracy exists to support capitalism. It doesn't make sense. The more I get into it, it doesn't make sense, because it's like capitalism is meant to help the world, but if it's supporting a bunch of a few elite of people and then everybody else is crumbs, it doesn't make sense to me. And this is what's happening in society. We are just a number, a statistic, a digit on a code or on a national insurance paper. This is all we're seeming to be. And the more you try to fight for truth, the more they try to shut you down or make you not exist, because really they don't want the truth for the people. They want the people to live in ignorant bliss and just be able to take the piss even more.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for all your thoughts. We'll have to wrap up, but it was it's such a great pleasure to listen to you both, and thank you again for joining us tonight. Yeah. I just want to say we have officially closed the exhibition today, but we have also just launched a web document dedicated to the subject of policing and police brutality, and it's available on Biennale Warszawa website in resources.